This is Clinical Conversations. I'm Joe Elia, and my co-host, Dr. Danielle Schurer of the Medical University of South Carolina, is on the line. The topic this time is colonoscopy, specifically the removal of polyps during the procedure and the effect that it has on mortality from colorectal cancer. Our guest is Zauber, first author on a New England Journal of Medicine report that describes the long-term follow-up of some 2,600 patients who had adenomatous polyps removed. After a median follow-up of 16 years, their death rates from colorectal cancer were half those found in the general population. Dr. Zauber is in the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York. Welcome, Dr. Zauber. Your paper...
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Nice to have you. Your paper has received a lot of attention. Is it fair to say that your results were anticipated and confirmed and served to confirm expectations, or were there surprises for you in the data?
Under the hypothesis that the adenoma is the precursor lesion for colon cancer, you would anticipate if you take out the adenomas, you'll reduce your cancer rate and cancer death rate. But we need to show that. We've shown previously that if you take out the adenomas, you reduce your colon cancer incidence rates. But you need to follow that through and also show that you have a mortality reduction. Think about the counter positive on that, that if you had not seen a reduction in death, you would wonder, what's the effect, what's the impact of taking out those adenomas? You want to make sure that indeed you're reducing the death rate due to colon cancer. So it's what we expected to happen, provided that indeed taking out the adenomas makes a difference.
And in your study, you used two different control groups. One, you compared the general population, and then the other control group you used from the original study were patients whose polyps were not adenomatous polyps. So can you explain to our listeners the rationale for having two different comparison groups and what power that added here in analysis?
Sure. So the holy grail of screening trials would be to do a randomized control trial of colonoscopy versus usual care where people were getting nothing.
Sure.
But we don't have that. What we have here is an adenoma cohort that was formed from 1980 through 1990 as part of a randomized trial of surveillance after founding adenomas. And we can follow them long-term over time. So what's the appropriate comparison group of a total adenoma cohort? The best comparison would be people that have adenomas, but you didn't take them out. Well, clearly we're not going to do that. That you can do hypothetically, but you aren't going to have a clinical trial that does that. There is a supplement to this paper that does the hypothetical with a microsimulation model. I lead a microsimulation model that's NCI-sponsored called SysNet, and we did show that if you theoretically could simulate a huge population and then found just the people who had adenomas and let the adenomas keep going along with the natural history, that we would get even larger reduction than what we're observing in the two comparisons that we did. So that's part of the supplement, and that showed a 92% reduction in colon cancer mortality with taking out the adenomas. So we don't have a randomized control trial here of colonoscopy per se, and we can't do this hypothetical where we leave adenomas in and just wait, 20 years and see what happens. So the comparators we used were to the general population, first of all. The adenoma cohort is a higher risk population. These are the people with the potential to go on and form cancer, and some of those will cause a cancer death. And so it's a higher risk population being compared to the general population risk, which is lower. And even with that comparator, we, with the intervention, have a 53% reduction in the colon cancer mortality. Mm-hmm. So we think that that's a strong comparator. You're taking a higher risk population and you're bringing it down to 50% lower than the general population risk. I'd like to just go on and mention the second comparator we do have, which is the non-adenoma population, because they had some polyps, but not the polyps that had the potential to become a cancer, and they're from the exact same patient population as that of those who come into the study because they have adenomas. It's the same centers, it's the same endoscopists doing the same protocol colonoscopy at baseline, and they don't have the adenoma part, so that they would be considered to be low risk. And when you compare the adenoma population with intervention to the non-adenoma population, over the first 10 years, the rates are the same. So I think that's a very good statement that you take, again, a high-risk population and bring it down to a rate that's 50% lower than that of the general population and as low as that of a population that does not have adenomas at all. So I think those are good comparators.
So it sounds like, on the whole, you're pretty satisfied that you have a solid case that colonoscopy with appropriate polypectomy reduces mortality. And then tell us a little bit more about those patients with adenomatous polyps that underwent strict surveillance.
The randomized trial was the idea that how often should you follow patients with adenomas, and it was designed in the time period when colonoscopy had just come into use, and so how often should these patients be seen? And they were asked to come back. They were randomized to either come back after 1 year and 3 years of their initial colonoscopy or to wait 3 years, and then all were offered a 6-year. So in that randomized control part, people were under strict surveillance. And 81% of the people in the randomized trial part had at least one or more surveillance colonoscopies, and that's what you would. That's what what you have to test is not only finding the adenoma, but including the fact that there should be surveillance following that. I mean, that's what the protocol is. So you really wouldn't want to be. You couldn't clinically separate out. These are patients who just had an initial colonoscopy and then were not surveyed, because that's not the way you do clinical care.
Sure.
So it's both. So I don't have any strong characteristics of the people that didn't come back, the 20% that didn't have another. There were not any strong clinical factors there that would have predicted who was going to come back or not.
Okay.
This was in a period before colonoscopy was known to have such an effect. People were not necessarily getting reimbursed for it in the same way. I think the 81% getting one or more colonoscopy surveillance is really good. I noticed recently in the paper that from the PLCO, when they looked at how many people came back, those are the negatives. They were getting maybe 80%. I don't have the figure in front of me. They had like 80% do a first return, but only 50% doing a second return. So people started dropping off. I don't think that there were strong differences in who were followed very strictly versus those that were not. I do know that at least one of the cancer deaths was someone who had dropped out. There were multiple letters sent to that person and returned to sender address unknown. So there were, the surveillance is, you want to have appropriate surveillance. But, clinically that there's been both underuse and overuse of surveillance, where that people that should be coming back are not coming back at a high enough rate, and people who only had hyperplastic polyps are coming back as if they had advanced adenomas. So we really want to get that surveillance issue right clinically and in community practice, that we get people brought back appropriately. Surveillance is good, but you don't want to overuse it, but you do want those people, that the higher risk population, to be coming back for surveillance.
The journal's editorial writer, Dr. Zauber, their writers, they mentioned that colonoscopy could be used to screen people at age 60. And with those having adenomatous polyps undergoing a strict subsequent surveillance and screening, but excusing everyone else from further surveillance. Do your results support a move in that direction?
I thought that Dr. Bratnauer's suggestion was very interesting. We have actually modeled something of this nature with the microsimulation modeling that I talked to you about with our SUSCENT program, and we did it for the U.S. Preventative Service Task Force when we talked about an age to begin and an age to end screening and intervals of screening. And we found that if you only were going to do one colonoscopy in a lifetime, like this with the triage, age 60 would be the age to do it.
Okay.
So that's interesting, because that fits right with what Dr. Bratnauer was saying. But we found that with what was eventually recommended by the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force was to begin at age 50 and keep screening to 75, and if you hadn't found any adenomas or colon cancers by then you could stop screening. That actually gave more life years gained than only doing a single colonoscopy at age 60. So I think some of this is resources. I think the U.S. is blessed with a far greater endoscopy capacity to do colonoscopy than other countries. So it's a question partly of resources on this, because indeed that one-time colonoscopy from our modeling would say if you begin at 60, that if you only had one time, 60 is going to maximize your life years saved. But if you're willing to do multiple colonoscopy screens, that's people that have a colonoscopy, and even though then it was negative, they follow them up again in 10 years. That will give you a few more life years gained.
What advice could you give to clinicians in those scenarios where their patients are reluctant to undergo any colonoscopy?
It doesn't have to be colonoscopy. What we're suggesting is to do screening, but the point is if you have a positive fecal immunochemical test, then you do need to go for colonoscopy. What we're saying in this paper is there are two ways you can affect colon cancer mortality. One is by detecting a cancer early, and the other is by detecting and removing the adenomas. And what we're showing here is removing the adenomas does have benefit.
Yeah.
So, there's a large benefit from these results. I think what you want to say is that this is worthwhile doing.
I want to thank you, Dr. Zauber, for the time you spent with us today.
Thank you.
That was our 147th edition. All earlier ones may be found at podcasts.jwatch.org. We come to you from Journal Watch, whose website is jwatch.org. Clinical Conversations executive producer is Adore Yano. I'm Joe Elia. Dr. Danielle Schurer and I thank you for listening.